Hey guys, thank you. Welcome for joining us on another episode. Is it an episode or a show?
What are we doing here?
There goes Saulo renaming everything. It's another episode, segment, whatever it is, of R-Rated Christianity. For those of you who have not joined us before, this is a apologetics type platform, meaning that we defend the Christian worldview on a multiple of topics. We don't avoid any topic, and we try to tackle topics that typical Big C churches or the Big C church, the body of Christ, does not want to handle. We believe that a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, a student of Christ, should be able to handle any social issue, any topic through the lens of Christianity. And so we try to practically, but more importantly, biblically and scripturally defend a biblical Christian heavenly worldview. And so tonight's topic is very dear to me. I'm very passionate about the topic tonight because it's the topic of guns and gun violence. And we talk about violence, including guns. There's violence with fists, there's violence with clubs, there's violence with cars, there's violence with planes, there's violence with knives, and there's violence with guns. And so we're going to try to bring some clarity to this topic, but more importantly, how to look at a topic like this through the lens of Christianity and through the biblical worldview. But before we do that, I'm going to take Saulo's over there trying to keep track of all the comments later on and the call-ins, because we're going to be taking live calls, so please feel free to call. I don't know any other show that takes live calls. We don't filter them, and we'll just address the topics and the questions honestly, biblically, and as they come in. But what is it to share, right, Saulo? Share if you can, please. It's usually Saulo's duty to make sure you share and let people know if they want to enjoy this episode or this show, and call in and just feel free to comment. Saulo's going to be looking at the comments. We're going to try to address as many as we can, because this ultimately is about you. We want people to be able to ask questions, to inquire, to push back, have respectful conversation, and we like to model having conversations. We've talked about today that it's very difficult to even talk to people about things without people losing their shit. Oh, and by the way, this is R-rated for a reason. We're just going to talk regular. It's very raw, it's very real. We're not going to be disrespectful, but just authentic. This is going to be authentic. We're just going to talk the way people talk, and that's it. And we've already addressed the language in a past episode, but it's about guns, and it's more importantly about this horrible shooting that occurred in Texas in a church near Fort Worth. As someone who has experienced gun violence, my brother, as most people know, on August 15th, 1996 at 2:14 in the morning, he was shot in the face in my parents' driveway. We walked out literally 3 minutes later. George has heard me talk about it numerous times in many of our public speech talks and teachings. And my parents were there, my younger brother was there. I loaded his body on the gurney. After they did the investigation, I helped my pop wash his blood off my driveway. And I saw my mom cry the way only a mom can cry. I saw my pop cry for the first time because his son, Mike Jr., was on his driveway. So this is very real to me. I didn't go to sensitivity training. I didn't read it about it in a book. I understand this topic. And so I have a very strong opinion about it. Yeah, but my opinion doesn't matter, because as a follower of Jesus Christ, as I said before, and George and I have talked about before, I'm not entitled to an opinion. My opinion is Jesus' opinion. I am persuaded by the book that we call the Bible. I am absolutely convinced that this first century Jew named Yeshua, Jesus, walked this earth and did the things he said he did, but more importantly was and is who he says he is. And that influences everything in my life, to include all topics and all issues and things of this nature. So tonight's going to talk about guns and Christians and guns, and we've talked in past shows, George, and the professor's back with us again. We're happy to have him. But we've talked about pacifism in the past, because there's so many topics that spawn from this, right? It's not just about guns. It's turning the other cheek. It's pacifism. Are we supposed to be aggressive as Christians? Are we supposed to defend ourselves? Would Jesus have supported having weapons? They didn't have guns back then, but what does it look like today versus back then? And we look at the book not only as a biblical, a theological book for us, a spiritual book for us, but it's also a historical book. We can't ignore that side of it too, and I think you're not properly handling this, our worldview, without looking at the Bible as a historical book, right, George? And so we were given clarity on this topic, but it was interesting. And Saulo, we were chatting, we talked about this a little bit earlier, that some of the comments, we just posted it this afternoon to give people a heads up what we're going to talk about, because obviously we didn't know that this was going to happen, this horrible, evil event that happened recently in Fort Worth in that church. And some of the comments I was interested by. I mean, I was fascinated by them. I just read them on the way in here. I walked in. I was late, of course, and I was just reading some of this because I wanted to address them. And I'm just, I guess I'm fascinated by how people completely, I don't want to say the word illogical, maybe it's illogical to an extent, just lose their crap over guns. And I get it because, trust me, I get it. Because the results, if they're misused, is horrific. And it's the ultimate result on this side of heaven. Someone loses their life on this side of heaven. So I get it, I've experienced it, I understand it. But the logic when it applied to guns is not the same logic as with any other issue or any other topic. And I think I think we need to delve into that, because then it's going to lead us to the conversation about Christians and guns and what does the Bible say about it.
Yeah. Man, I'm thinking about the level of outrage that we see today. It doesn't really have a whole lot of historical precedent. I mean, it's relatively new. It occurred to me, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. James Garfield was assassinated in 1881. McKinley in 1901, Kennedy in 1963, and almost Reagan in 1981. And after every single one of those, there was not a peep, relatively speaking, about banning guns.
Wow. And that's the president of our
country.
These are the presidents of our country.
It seems to me that would be a really good time to have something to say.
The leader of the free world. And then understand, why do you say, why
and even Reagan himself, while he was recuperating, was certainly against that position.
Against the
position of banning guns, or somehow blaming a gun as the issue behind his assassination. Because at the end of the day, everybody knows intuitively that a person pulled the trigger. Everybody knows that. Reagan knew that. He refused to go down that road. And it wasn't until some 10, maybe 12 years later that he had a more liberal position in terms of supporting the Brady Bill. But it just occurred to me that this craze, this default position of blaming the gun is a relatively new phenomenon.
You used the proper word. You said the word craze. I mean, it almost is a craze because...
It's a bypass of logic.
I mean, someone who's involved very intimately with the justice system, as a former prosecutor, defense attorney, I've been a magistrate judge, I've seen it from every angle. I mean, there's no other topic, there's no other issue that we blame the object for the behavior of an individual. I mean, nobody blames alcohol. Nobody blames a car when someone drives intoxicated and someone loses their life. Yeah. They blame the person that drank the alcohol to the level of intoxication, then made the decision to get behind the car, and then the life is lost because the alcohol caused the accident. I mean, that seems to be logical. When forget about Christian, not Christian, that's just logic. I mean, just logically, no one blames, as someone, you've seen all the different posts, and no one blames the fork for someone being overweight, no one blames the pencil for misspelling. I mean, no one blames the car for driving drunk. But for some reason, if this was a gun, and it was the gun, the object itself, not the misuse of it, not the irresponsible, and again, this has nothing to do, we'll talk about training, we'll talk about other things, then get to a biblical view of it. I'm just talking logic now. Forget about being a Christian. I'm just being a human being right now. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, and Christians ought to be the best at performing thought experiments like you just did. We ought to be, that's in our pursuit of truth, we ought to be using analogical skills, using those types of analogies. Right? And if one seems so ridiculous and so absurd, and there's all this craze, right? All this passion, or what's going on? There must be something going on here. And usually, follow the money. Usually there's some sort of agenda, because that's how human beings operate. What's the agenda? What's the hype? So that's the part that frustrates me. We have people that are losing their lives, and this deserves serious conversation.
Well,
and we're not giving it serious conversation. It's diary of the mouth, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And man, that is a terrible way to honor the memory of those whose lives are lost.
Well, and let's just look at some evidence. I mean, you're a scientist by trade and by training, myself being a trial lawyer. I mean, so let's look at data. I mean, in 2018, you and I spoke about this earlier today, and I wanted to make sure we were accurate. You know how conscientious we are of trying to be making sure that we're as accurate as we can. In 2018, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has some statistics. I have my criticisms on them for other things, but I mean, they can collect data. I mean, that's what they're doing in this case. In 2018, the amount of lives lost to gun violence was somewhere around 35,000. I mean, let's round it. 33,000, 35, make it 36 if you want to round up, somewhere around there. All violence related to guns, including 60% of suicides and justifiable shootings, meaning if somebody walks in right now and I draw my weapon and shoot to defend the people behind here, defense of third person, use of deadly force properly, that would be in that number as well.
All violent crime.
Right. Law enforcement, someone breaking into a house, protecting your kids, whatever. All deaths related to guns. Alcohol, on the other hand, 88,000. Round it down, 85,000. It doesn't matter, but it almost triples. I don't see that craze and the outrage to ban alcohol.
And yet behind both scenarios, there was a human being exercising a choice.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And then vehicles is its own number, but I'm telling you that it's not even close. And it's really, and I say this respectfully, but I have to be very, very deliberate about my words. It's not even debatable. You can't even debate whether alcohol and vehicles are responsible, the misuse of them. How about that? I want to use the words properly, and I want to handle the topics as proper as I expect other people to do. The misuse of alcohol and the misuse of a vehicle is responsible for way more lives being lost than guns. And we're even lumping in all the justifiable shootings and then the unfortunate event where somebody, for whatever reason, decides to take their own life. This is not a third person, this is their own life, which is horrible, of course, but we're throwing that in there as well.
No, but I think it's insulting.
Not even close.
At some level, it's insulting that we actually have to break it down to the, I mean, this is intuitive. We conduct our lives this way. Guns don't hop off a counter and go shoot somebody. Objects don't do that of their own volition. There's a human being that's misusing that to hurt someone else. Everybody knows that.
But it's not. But it doesn't. And again, we're still.
The fact that we have to break it down.
But we're still in the logic stage right now. We're not even. We're trying to lay a foundation. I want to talk as a citizen of this country. I want to talk as someone who is intimately involved in the justice system. And I always say that the justice system is a social experiment, right? That's all it is. I mean, we know. I mean, I went through it myself when I was arrested for selling drugs. I turned my life around. I've been prosecuted. I've defended. I've been a magistrate. I mean, so I've seen this social experiment called the justice system and why people come in and out. So I'm very much intuitive and kind of connected to this. And I don't understand it. I really don't understand this idea that the gun is the only situation where we blame the object, and it just doesn't make logical sense to me. I can't wrap my mind around it when I ask people, why do we blame the object? I really want to know, instead of the person misusing the object and the moral compass or lack thereof of the individual, then no one wants to have that discussion. It's like, because by definition, someone who is going to do something as evil, and let's call it what it is, it's evil, as evil as what happened in the latest event at the church in near Fort Worth, no law was going to stop that. There's no law that was going to stop Sutherland Springs. There was no law that was going to stop what happened in New York at that with the Jewish synagogue. There was nothing that was going to stop these people. By definition, were not going to follow any laws that humans could even contemplate. And so when people, in my humble opinion, are irresponsible about their words and incite people because we're dealing with emotion. Because remember, my brother's in that statistic of deaths by guns, gun violence. I get it. I mean, this is, again, this is very, very personal to me. And my prayer wasn't the ironic thing, George, was ironic or whatever it was, sad thing. 2 weeks after Mike passed, the law for your concealed license had passed in 95, and this happened in 96. 2 weeks after Mike passed, his concealed license came in. So Mike that night did not have his gun because he didn't want to be caught carrying it illegally. At the time, it would have been illegal because he didn't have his license yet. And so he didn't have his weapon that night with him. And he had every intention of starting to carry it and trained with it. And when I reached of age, I was going to go for my license, which I did. And so, I was like, gosh, I wish he had his weapon. I wish he had his weapon. I wish he had his weapon. And he didn't. Would it have changed anything? I don't know, George. But I sure want my loved ones and other people's loved ones to have a fighting chance. And we lose the idea, we just kind of brush over the idea that people with weapons properly used stopped this maniac from stealing other lives. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And I just think that Christians, George said this earlier, so now we're going to go into the topic for tonight. Our responsibility as followers of Christ is to properly handle truth. That's God's character. Love, justice, truth. We don't have justice without truth, by the way. And love is God's character, that agape love, that unconditional love. And so we are to lovingly but properly handle truth. That's what we're supposed to sift through all the bullshit, not get into all the political agendas, not get distracted by all the noise, and Christians are no different, and we can get distracted by noise and emotion. Not that we're not compassionate. Remember, passion is good, emotions can be very bad when you let them run your decisions. And we're supposed to sift through all that like a knife through butter and get to the truth and properly handle that and stand for it. But not just our truth, objective truth, but God's truth, which we believe is the ultimate truth and ultimate justice.
I think you're going to run into those other things as a matter of just thinking logically about this, because we use the alcohol and the guns analogy. All other factors being equal, okay, it makes sense. But all other factors are not equal. So it's very lopsided. Why is it lopsided? So everybody should be asking, why is it so lopsided? Why the hype? Why the craze? I mean, it begs the question. And at some point, you got to go there. Yeah, and ask yourself that question.
For me, I asked myself.
Not you, I mean just generally.
No, it's a general you. But most people know my position. I'm a strong advocate for responsible gun ownership. And I say responsible because number one, we already have laws. You have to be a certain age to own a gun to buy a weapon in state versus federal. They have a little bit of nuances and differences, but not just anybody can buy a weapon, not just anyone at any age can buy a weapon. And then there's behavioral limitations as well.
Sure.
I mean, if somebody is a convicted felon, they cannot own a weapon. And then there's state and federal nuances and differences. This is not a legal class, but I'm just saying. So there's some laws, and you have to do some things. There's background checks, which I fully support background checks. I think you should. And so I had to ask myself at some point, especially being in politics and being a public figure, okay, are my social support, what I support socially, is it supported biblically? Because in the end, my biblical position is gonna outweigh whatever I feel or my social position. If I felt the Bible didn't support my position socially, well, then I'm going to change it.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
That's right. It's exactly. I'm going to default, because I believe, as I've shared on this show before, that when I'm called off this earth, and I pray that it's not for another 50 years or 45 years or whatever it is, that I'm going to stand before this first century Jew named Yeshua. I believe that as sure as I touch my brother George here. I mean, I really do. I'm convinced of that. It's not a feeling of mine, because my feelings suck, and just like your feelings suck. And so our feelings are going to do this throughout the day, and we're going to make crappy, shitty decisions based off our feelings. And so I have to be logical, and more importantly, biblical, which to me is logical, about my decisions. And so I had to ask myself, and you and I have been through this exercise, but I think it's important to go through it for the audience, is the position of responsible gun ownership a biblical position? And so I started in the Old Testament. And we did this on the show when we talked about pacifism. Yeah. I mean, and we'll get to turn the other cheek, and Saulo chimed in. Are you going to chime in at all today, Saulo? Okay, in a little while? Okay. I don't know what's going on with Saulo. I think he's got a stomach ache. He's gassy today. No. Are you gassy today? You got some gas, or what do you want to talk to? Okay. Sure. Get him on there. Get him on real quick. Just make him smile. He's red. Okay, get him off. He's going to get pissed off. All right, come back to me. Sorry about that, Tyler. All right, just want to wake him up. He was falling asleep on me. And so I wanted to make sure that the positions can be supported. And so I go old school. So thou shalt not kill. I had a discussion with somebody. It was a respectful one. And so I appreciate her candor and her respect. We had thou shalt not kill, she threw out at me. And it's not. We know that in Hebrew, it's thou shalt not murder. I mean, when you look at the Hebrew interpretation, it's not thou shalt not kill. It's thou shalt not murder. Well, is that consistent? Is that biblically consistent? Is God against all killing, or is he against murder? What's murder? Murder is the spilling of what? Innocent blood, right? Proverbs 6:16. So you go to Proverbs 6:16, God doesn't hate a whole bunch of things, but he has 6 things he hates. The 7th is detestable to him. And one of those 6 things he hates is the spilling of, listen, innocent blood, which is by definition murder. Yes. God hates murder. God hates the spilling of innocent blood. Thou shalt not murder, one of the 10 commandments, not thou shalt not kill. Is that consistent? Ecclesiastes 3 talks about there's time for everything under the sun, including a time to kill, never a time to murder. What does it mean by kill? In war, in self-defense, in defense of third person, defense of your children, defense of your spouse, defense of a stranger that's innocent. I mean, that is when it's appropriate. So to me, I started there. For me, George, when I went through this process of okay, is my social position, is it backed up by my biblical faith and my biblical following? And so I started there. Am I missing anything in the Old Testament?
No, the positions are consistent. I mean, they're expressed a little bit differently, but the position that you've described is the same in the Old Testament and the New. The preservation of human life is a moral issue.
Amen.
We would expect that not to change. Right. That's not going to change.
Is God different? I mean, you hear the Bill Maher, someone tagged Bill Maher. You hear the Bill Mahers and some of these dumbasses out there. Sorry, Bill. Yeah. You are kind of a dumbass when it comes to Christianity. You're not logical. But God in the Old Testament, he's like bipolar and he's all jacked up and he's the mean, angry God and he's a murderer and he's this and he's that, he's misogynistic and he's this. Yeah. And in the New Testament, he's coochie-coo Jesus that carries sheep and pats kids on the heads and love. And in the Old Testament, he's nuts. I mean, that's just not right. I mean, you and I have talked about this. We teach on this. God doesn't have a personality complex. I mean, he's the same God. Yes. And it's very consistent. I didn't mean to sabotage your comment. I was trying to make sure
we're going back 3.5 millennia. So we would expect the customs that are described to be entirely different. That's important. We would expect the culture to be totally different. And they are. And there are things that are offensive to modern day culture, just like 1,000 years from now, when somebody's reading your story, it might be offensive to them. So don't get your back up too much. Yeah. You know? So the problem is we read into the scripture based on our experience. We impose on the scripture a message, right? And because we don't want to read the message that's in there, because then we might actually have to change the shit.
And we call that eisegesis, right?
That's an eisegetic analysis.
Which means what? Let's make sure that everybody understands we're using the same term.
Eisegesis is the idea of imposing onto the text your own sensibilities.
Right, reading into it.
Right, it's the concept that scholars call an interpretive community. It's the idea that you think about life the way your community thinks about life, and then what is considered to be a mores gets imposed onto the text, or what is considered acceptable. Your sensibilities, right? Your perspectives gets imposed upon the text. So people do that as a community and they do that personally. People come into the scripture with personal needs. They read a passage in a way that meets their need and kind of, unfortunately, aligns with how they view the world. That's eisegesis.
And it's like fitting a circle in a square.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Well, it's twisting the scripture to mean what I want it to mean. It's reading what I wish God had said versus what he may have said.
That's good.
All right? So, and then there's exegesis, which is what we're expected to do. This is the idea in 2 Timothy chapter 2 of rightly dividing the word of truth, right? So that we can show ourselves approved to rightly handle it. Right. And so that means you need to look at it as a genre. Are you reading a poetic book? Are you reading a gospel? Are you reading an epistle? Are you reading a book of history? Are you reading a legal book? All that's different. And so depending on the structure of that book, right, the message is going to sound a little bit differently. When you read a legal book, that's going to read very differently than when you read the book of Psalms. And so God chose a certain literary form to communicate a message. So we need to know what that literary form is. Just a little bit of study. We need to understand the cultural background because it was a different culture. Right. We need to understand a little bit of the history because it was a different history. And as a student of the Word of God, there ought to be enough motivation to get into those things. And then in prayer and through the revelation of the Holy Spirit, you now have what's called a hermeneutical, an interpretive toolkit to be able to rightly handle the
And hermeneutics, just so people know, I mean, most people maybe you know or don't know, is the study of interpretation, right? Yep. So you have to understand linguistics, hermeneutics, the translation, cultural history. I mean, context matters. I mean, what we say, we use this all the time. I mean, we say this all the time.
This is all about context.
Right. I mean, I talk to people and say, hey, what does it mean? What does it mean to you if I say you're killing me? And they say, well, it depends. That's exactly right. It depends. I mean, it could be you're killing me, like you're making me laugh so much I'm about to pee in my pants, or you're killing me, you're frustrating me because you're screwing it up. What I'm asking you to do, you're not getting it right. You're killing me. Or you literally could be killing me because you're hitting me with a club or stabbing me or something like that. You're killing me. But context matters, and it's no different than when we're reading in 2020 now, I almost said 2019, into a book written, like you said, thousands of years ago, with their language, with their culture, with their context, with their historical perspective. And then we read into what we want it to be versus reading from the book and what does it really mean.
And we, of course, don't have the time to get into all those particulars, but I would recommend a book by Dr. Walt Russell called Playing with Fire. And it goes through these basic principles. And I think that's one of the greatest problems you've heard me say in the church today is that we're biblically illiterate. Now, Bill Maher is biblically illiterate times 1,000. Right. I mean, I don't know what Bible he says he reads, but he's certainly not reading mine. Right. And so that's a classic example of reading into the passage, which you have already been convinced of. Right. And you're just imposing upon the text, and that's dangerous.
That's right. So now I want to, Saulo, we're missing anything?
No. Yeah, let's invite people to call in.
Yeah, well, I mean,
we want to see their thoughts on the church shooting.
Yeah, Saulo, you want to invite them?
Just call them in. The numbers on the screen. People can call in. The number's on the screen. Because I have no camera.
The voice of God.
I didn't have my mic. But anyway, we want to thank people that are logged on. Jason said this. Nico rocks. Bill is a dumbass.
Bill is a dumbass.
Smart, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's wisdom. That's wisdom right there.
I just want to talk to Bill. Someone get him on the show with me. I'll go with him.
And Trey Wilder, he's been commenting often. He says, 1 Kings 18, 24, 38 to 40, I would hate to see a God who was not a pacifist. That's what Trey Wilder says. Hold on. Somebody else said this. Oh, Trey Wilder said something when we started. Here it goes.
That's what you're there to keep track of this stuff, Saulo.
I know. Man, I don't know why Facebook deletes them.
But
he was talking about that all the guards at the Vatican have guns. They're carrying guns.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's true. But here's the deal, Saulo, and George and I were talking about this leading to here today, and we've taught on this before. I mean, what is Jesus' position on this? I mean, so we look at, people always go to Luke 22:36, and you have to understand context in Luke when Jesus is saying, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Yeah. I mean, think about that, what they're saying. Okay, so historically, how important was a cloak to them back then? They lived in the desert. So in the daytime, it was hot as hell, no pun intended, it was. And so their cloak protected them from the heat. At the nighttime in deserts, you freeze your ass off, so their cloak kept them warm at nighttime. Your cloak with everything. I mean, I don't know what the equivalent today is, George. I mean, we're so nuts. And it's not your iPhone, I'm being sarcastic, but your phone, I mean, your car, something.
Anything of value.
Anything of tremendous value.
Tremendous value.
It's not just shoes. I mean, it's something of tremendous value. And Jesus says, you know what? If you don't have a sword, it's a very different time. George made a very good, you said something that I thought was a very good context.
Once in a while.
Every once in a while you get
once in a while.
Every once in a while. But this was one of those times. Earlier in Luke, he's sending people out. He's sending the disciples out and telling them, don't take your purse. You'll be provided for. Don't take this. You won't need that. Because it was a different season they were in, a very different season they were about to enter in Luke 22:36. And just really quickly, can you give context to
this
that?
is not unusual in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a lot of repetition of themes, and Jesus is repeating a theme here. He does that throughout Luke 22 and other places. But he does mention, he is assuming that they remember, and they do, but Luke chapter 9 and Luke chapter 10. There's two excursions, and he actually asks the disciples rhetorically about those previous excursions. He sends out 12 in Luke chapter 9, and he sends out 72 in Luke chapter 10. Just an extra tidbit there, that it wasn't just 12 guys and Jesus walking around. Jesus was the center of a massive movement.
That's right.
I mean, a massive movement. And this is why he was such a political threat. I mean, you want to talk about critical mass and growing by leaps and bounds. And so there was a lot of inertia in terms of sort of a revolutionary spirit. There was a lot of revolutionary inertia around Jesus. People had hoped that he was going to lead an assault on the existing powers of Rome. And this was
They thought it was going to be a physical assault. They thought the Messiah was going to come in and kick some ass.
And man, they were
be
pissed.
like David and just knock the head.
And if you read your Gospels,
right.
you're going to see there's a massive change in attitude from the week that Jesus is about ready to go into the crucifixion and the week before. I mean, he's a rock star.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, he is persona non grata. I mean, they want to kill him. What happened? Well, their hopes were crushed, right? And so before you judge them too fast, consider we're the same way. Right? When my hopes are crashed, man, my mood changes. And so that's what happened there.
Well, they were reading into Jesus versus reading from him. It was the same. It's no different.
They were hoping that he was sort of the carrier of their personal dreams. And I understand that, but that's not why he was there. And so Jesus is repeating some things. He's saying, hey man, do you remember back in Luke chapter 9, I sent out the 12, and I sent out the 72 in Luke chapter 10. I'm paraphrasing here so people can get a fuller context. And he basically says, hey, I didn't send you out with anything, but by the way, did you lack anything? And they said, no, we didn't. And because now he's about to send them out with certain things. He sends them out with equipment. He sends them out with a money bag, right? A purse. He sends them out
Now you're in Luke 22. Now.
I am. Yeah. I'm back in Luke 22, and he's hearkening back to Luke 9 and 10 to differentiate, because he's saying, hey, something's changed.
That's right.
Before then, you guys went out, you had everything you needed, right? The generosity of people made sure that you had everything you needed. I didn't tell you to be equipped. Something's changed because things were getting really, really intense. Jesus is approaching his crucifixion. There's a lot of political heat. These guys have crosshairs right on their forehead. He knows that. And Jesus is at the center of this. And throughout Luke 22, he's basically trying to tell them, you guys need to get really, really acquainted with the notion of rejection. Because I'm about to get really rejected. I mean, they're about to off me. And if you're going to be associated with me, you need to get really, really comfortable with the notion that you're going to be rejected. And you need to be prepared. And so he tells them to be prepared. He says, man, he tells them to get a purse. He tells them to get a food bag, a knapsack.
Right.
Sandals, right? This doesn't mean anything to us today, but it sure means a lot to them.
Context,
and then he tells them to get a sword. If you don't have a sword, sell your
cloak.
what we would call an outer frock, something of great value. Sell it and get one, right? So he's telling them to be prepared. He's not telling them to launch some sort of revolutionary attack on Rome, which is how they heard what he was saying. Because if you read that all the way to the end, they actually say, hey, look, Lord, I've got 2 swords. We've got 2 swords here. Now, for the gun-toter, the gun-toter tends to conclude that Jesus, when Jesus says, okay, that's enough, that Jesus is actually encouraging a revolutionary assault. Think about how moronic that is for a moment. You've got 11 guys and 2 swords, and that's going to be the basis of your revolution. That's not what he's saying. He's not assuming or endorsing a revolutionary attack. And he's not going after the swords. He's not telling them that swords are bad. So what is Jesus saying to your earlier point?
He's correcting the misuse of the sword. That's what he's doing.
The issue.
That's right.
Do not mishandle the sword. Do not mishandle, that sword is our gun today. Do not mishandle your weapon.
Right.
Any strength taken to an extreme can become a weakness.
That's right. And but that would have been a perfect time. Not only is he not correcting, it's not that someone brought it up to him. It's not that someone presented a sword to him, like in Matthew 26, when they're coming and Peter's a Billy badass. Oh, I'll go die with you. And you're gonna deny me tonight. No, I'm a badass. I'll do it. And it's not like Jesus didn't know Peter's packing, right? I mean, Peter's had a sword this whole time. He's walking with him for 3 years. And then when they come for Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, then he draws his sword.
Well, that's in verse 50.
And he's not going for the damn ear. He's going for the neck. Right, exactly. He missed. He chopped off the ear. No one goes for an ear. It's stupid. Exactly. And so he missed. And Jesus didn't say, what are you doing with a sword? How dare you? Don't you ever get rid of that damn thing.
Where we're going, we don't need swords.
Yeah, he didn't say any of that stuff. He just said, put that back. You're misusing it. This is not the time, because this is where Jesus was supposed to be turned over. And this was something he'd been saying for a long time, but their dumbasses weren't listening because they were reading into Jesus and what he was going to do. Same problem we do today. So there's 2 wonderful, they're just very authentic analysis of there would have been 2 perfect times. One of them, Jesus is teaching on it with nobody asking him a question. The second one, it was presented to him and he didn't correct it by saying, hey, you shouldn't have had that sword. So I think it's very clear. And George, there's nothing wrong with the idea of a Christian having a quote unquote sword. Today's sword would be some type of weapon or gun.
No, that's very exactly consistent. Right. It's a weapon, a weapon to
Where do some Christians go wrong arguing that we're not supposed to? Because that's a discussion in the church.
Well, I think a lot of it stems from a misunderstanding of what Jesus is trying to communicate in Matthew chapter 5. In the Beatitudes, and when he's essentially reinterpreting the law, not abolishing the Old Testament law, but reinterpreting the law. So when you get past about the first 9 or 10 verses in Matthew 5, then he starts to sort of explain the true spirit of the Mosaic law.
Now let's just get to it. Turn the other cheek. Everybody mishandles that. Not everybody.
So the context in turning the other cheek is a context of not what I like to call killing a fly with an elephant gun. Somebody personally, and really that's the context. It's the notion of horrible insults or offenses within the context of an interpersonal relationship.
Verbal.
This isn't a mandate for nations. It doesn't mean that nations should be able to protect themselves. It's got no context at all with regard to a military application. There's lots of other passages that make that clear. And what Jesus is trying to say is that you don't retaliate. You don't cook anger. You don't allow anger to go unresolved. You don't start strategizing the demise of your brother, right? And because if you do that, what does he then talk about? He talks about murder,
right?
And then he talks about adultery.
Right there.
There's a common theme here, and that theme is when there are offenses and you don't deal with these offenses.
Yes.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Don't lose your thought though. This is live calls.
What's your comment or question?
Okay, Nico said where is it that Christians, like what scripture messes them up? Like where do they always go with, like their go-to why Christians can't have guns? And the one I hear the most is the one where in Romans where it says vengeance is mine. And to me, that shows that it. Are you talking to me still or no?
Yes. Keep going.
You continue.
Okay. Vengeance is mine is exactly what Nico was saying in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. How the translation for that is murder. Vengeance is premeditated. You're thinking about it. That you're not supposed to do that. That's a sin. But tell me where self-defense is wrong and where Christians can't do that when in Exodus it tells you very clearly, if a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, he's not going to be no blood guilt. He's not going to be found guilty. He was doing something wrong. It says in Romans, if God's servant, God is there for your good. If you're doing wrong, be afraid, because he who bears the sword isn't bearing it in vain. You're going to pay for that. There's nothing wrong with self-defense. There is nothing wrong with having to take care of something. In Nehemiah, they're commanded to build with one hand, hold the weapon with the other. In Psalms, he says, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Is that not what this man did in Dallas? He's rescuing others from being murdered. He's delivering them that were found in the hand of the wicked. That has absolutely nothing to do with the go-to scripture that everybody's way out is, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Vengeance is premeditated. When you're having to defend yourself from evil, that's completely different. And that's the spiritual side of it, in my opinion.
What's your name?
The citizen. My name is Christine Crane.
Oh, Christine.
Oh, hey, Christine.
And
Well, Christine,
the spiritual side of it is, the citizen side of it, when he said in the beginning, as a citizen, I don't understand that. Well, what I don't understand is, isn't Chicago, I don't have all the statistics, accurately, like y'all can spew them out real fast, but in Chicago, isn't that have like the strictest gun law?
No.
And what are they, the top?
One, I don't know about the strictest, but you're right. It's one of the most strict. Yeah.
How in the world is our own city? How is our own city going to be able to control gun laws when we can't even control? Was it the fireworks? We can't even do that rule.
Christine,
the gun control, taking it away, it's pointless, it's dumb, and it is not at all biblical, and it does not mean you're less of a Christian for having a gun.
Well, Christine, you gave me a lot of red meat,
Yeah.
and you said a whole bunch, and you said a lot of great things. Vengeance is something very different than self-defense. When you're meeting something, so vengeance means that an incident has happened, and it's like vigilantism. Christians should not be be a vigilante. That's another issue that people don't talk about enough. So something happened. So if you at that church, someone was there to self-defense. They defended themselves with this evil man, and he lost his life, I'm glad about that. Well, let's say he got away. Well, a Christian should not plan some type of riot to go get him and hang him up. That we have laws, God's a God of order, and vengeance will be God's through the justice system most likely, but ultimately, eternally. God's going to have the final say-so. But it's no different than David and Goliath. David was an avenge deal. He was defending. It was a self-defense. It was really a defense of third person situation if you analyze it under today's laws. Here comes David. He didn't say, Goliath, give me your head. Please, do you mind chopping it off yourself? He knocks him down with the rocks, and then he takes Goliath's sword. People don't want to talk about this. And then he hacks it up. He hacks off his head. You think it wasn't a samurai sword, one swipe and Goliath handed his head over. He had to hack off this big-ass giant's head. And then he takes it with him and say, hey, is this the guy I was supposed to be afraid with? Because my God's greater than this guy. So it's completely misused, and Christine is exactly right.
So when totally the notion of vengeance as God instructs human beings. That's why I pulled this up, because I wanted to go back to the root of it in the Old Testament, because I like the way that it's worded there. There's a distinction between God's vengeance, which is very different than human beings. Human beings are always going to over-embellish an infraction. They're not going to judge people rightly. You tend to get angry. You got your blind spots. You're not going to do that with pure motives, whereas God does. And you can kind of see that in the original instruction in Leviticus 19:18. This is the Old Testament version of love your neighbor as yourself. This is why I always say what was scandalous about Jesus is not that he was saying something totally new. It's that he was saying something so incredibly old, and they had missed it. And he was kind of lovingly rubbing it in their faces. But listen to this. He says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge. So the notion of revenge is always attached to the notion of holding a grudge.
Going deeper.
Or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself.
Old Testament.
Leviticus 19:18. And so that's the spirit with which
and love
Jesus
your neighbor
is communicating
as yourself
in Matthew 5.
is Matthew 22:37, right?
Is.
And it's in Luke as well. So Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. And then, equally as important, love your neighbor as yourself. Very consistent with Leviticus. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's it. I thought it was excellent. Her reference is in Romans chapter 12, verse 9, which interesting follows the idea of what? Renewing your mind.
Right, Romans 12:2.
Yeah, so that you are in a position to hear the will of God.
That's right.
Romans 12:2
Excellent.
and 3.
Well, and so the bottom line is, should Christians carry weapons? Well, should or can they? There's no, and let's be really clear about this, that there's no biblical mandate that you cannot. Period. And they're just not. You're not. If you don't want to, then I think someone needs to pray about it.
There's no mandate to carry
There's
weapons.
not a
There's
mandate
no mandate
to.
not to carry
That's right.
weapons.
I mean, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exactly right. Now, part of my position of being a responsible gun owner has to do with training with it. If you're not going to train with your weapon, carry a hammer. Don't carry a gun. I mean, shit, you're gonna hurt. You talk about misusing of something. I mean, carry a damn hammer or some stun gun or whatever, mace or whatever you want to do, a knife or a club, or asp, but don't carry a gun. Train with your weapon. It's just that simple. If you have a car, it's great that you have a car, but if you don't drive and train with your car, you're going to hurt somebody.
I was going to ask your permission, real quick, to read verse 36.
In what?
In Luke chapter 22, verse 36, because Jesus says, "But now things have changed. I want you to get a purse. I want you to get a bag. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written." And then he projects back to Isaiah 53:12, speaking it about himself. And he was numbered with the transgressors. So that transgressor is a criminal. What he's saying is, I'm going to be lumped in as a criminal. I'm going to be treated like one. And guess what? So are you. If you're going to be associated with me, you're going to be treated as a criminal. Life's going to get really, really rough. And he continues. And that's what's written about me, and now it's reaching its fulfillment. So he's going back to Isaiah 53:12. The disciples, as he's talking about the sword, they said, "Hey, see, Lord, here are two swords." And then Jesus says, and this is really misunderstood a lot of times, I don't want to explain it. Jesus says, "That's enough," he replied. And then it abruptly ends. And like I said, the typical gun supporter, I shouldn't say that, a lot of gun supporters conclude that Jesus is advocating, using a sword inappropriately or for violent means. And that's not what he's saying. He's actually repudiating them. He's basically saying, enough with that, guys. Enough already.
Don't misuse
because he
it.
recognizes that they are misreading into what he's saying. And then this is consistent because in verse 50, he goes after Peter for misusing it and cutting off Malchus's ear. So Jesus is really consistent. He wants us to practice vigilance, not revolution, but vigilance. That's important.
Well, and then there was an op-ed. I want to get it. It was sent to me in the U.S. Was it USA Today? They did an op-ed.
Man.
Talk. I mean, I really have to temper myself when I hear stupid shit like this. I really do. I mean, because they're how terrifying it is. So you have
much idiocy,
an
so little
evil.
time.
You have an evil person, whatever that thing was, that came into this church and murdered two innocent men. And gave their families, listen to me, a new normal. New Year Eve, New Year's, this 2000 is very different for those families. So we all have our opinions. Some are cheap opinions, some are more seasoned opinions, and it has a bigger cost to their opinions. But everybody is debating this issue, and that family is living with a new normal. And then this stupid ass magazine, I'm sorry, it's absolutely stupid. I mean, there's no other way. If something's stupid, it's stupid. This is stupid. It's irresponsible, it's stupid, and it's illogical. And they're saying how terrifying it is that the other members had guns. I mean, almost trying to switch this around. Forget the evil. Forget that two of those members, or one of those members, is what stopped this animal from killing more people and making a new normal in more families' lives, like two wasn't enough. How terrifying the thought of people with guns. How terrifying the thought that someone today around the country is going to die from an alcohol-related event. Numerous of them. And numerous cars are going to be misused. Numerous fill in the blank are going to be misused. But nobody talks about that at all. I mean, sex is misused, everything. Mándame. Texting and driving, that's exactly right. Thank you, Bob. I mean, there's so many things that can be used, but when it comes to guns, it's something very different happens. And I think it's incumbent on a Christian, whether you so. I had someone of the faith, of the Christian faith, tell me, I don't personally like guns because, and they were very honest about it, because I'm ignorant to them. I'm ignorant. I don't know enough about them. I thought that was very honest and fair.
Sure, that's fair.
But I believe that Christians who want to should be able to carry guns like any other citizen, and they're very pro like I say, responsible gun ownership, supported responsible gun ownership. And that's important. And so, I mean, the idea that a Christian cannot defend themselves is absolutely insane. And it's misguided at best, evil at worst, if someone tries to misuse that. And I think we have to decipher through all this BS and figure out what Christ thinks about this issue.
I think a wonderful revelation that's about to come our way here in the near future because of, unfortunately, because of all this negative attention, is what exactly is the defensive use of guns doing for society? Because that's a statistic that's cooking right now, and the CDC is starting to report on this kind of stuff, and they're reporting that there's enough data to conclude that the defensive use of guns results in individuals having obviously much lower injury than those who use some other means of self-protection. If that makes any sense. So that statistic is cooking. And the reason we don't have very good statistics on that right now, in other words, is because it's not reported. They're not making it to a police station. It's not making it to the radar. I'm really looking forward to getting my arms around some of those numbers, because the numbers are huge. It's estimated as somewhere between 500,000 and 3 million events per year. Think about that for a moment. And a good percentage
of a gun is properly used in defense?
Right, a defensive use of a gun.
And it doesn't mean that it resulted in a death, obviously, because those deaths are what they are.
And a significant portion of those are saying that had they not used them, it would have resulted in their death.
In their death, right.
And so when you start putting that into the mix, it'll just completely obscure the other half of the narrative that everybody hears from the media and from somebody else who's got an agenda.
And what I think we need to be very cautious about and call out lovingly, but boldly and courageously, is when someone of the secular or non-biblical worldview criticizes, attacks, so to speak, or not so to speak, overtly attacks the Christian worldview, but then yet when it's convenient for them, they try to use a biblical principle, misuse a biblical principle to attack us once again, to try to use it. And if we can't properly handle the word of truth, well then we're gonna fall short again. Saulo, you have a comment? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Pastor Fleming, amazing. He says the shepherd defends the sheep with the same force that the wolf comes to kill the sheep. And as a shepherd, I'm gonna be the first one firing up rounds on a wolf. That's
Pastor Fleming is actually, he's biblically talking about what the law says, that you meet the appropriate force. So the reasonable belief of apparent danger and was it imminent? That's the law on self-defense and defense of third person and use of the reasonable belief. Reasonable, what's reasonable today? Very different than it was when you and I were growing up, Saulo and George. The reasonable belief of apparent, not even actual danger, and that's where people don't understand, of apparent danger and was it imminent? So if somebody walks in right now, butt-ass naked, and says, I'm gonna kill all you son of a bitches, what are you going to kill me with? Not with that thing. I mean, so I can't go off, haul off, and shoot his ass. But if he has a trench coat and says, hey, I'm going to kill you Christians, and does something, well, that's a whole, he might be pulling out a journal, but I don't know that. That's apparent versus actual danger. That's a legal discussion we can have later on. But what he's saying is you match the force. If someone calls you a name, you can't punch them. If someone punches them, you can't shoot them. Things that you have to meet that force. I think that's biblical. That's justice. That's an eye for an eye. That's merited justice. That's a merited, meaning an even response. And that's what we're supposed to do as Christians. That's biblical. I just don't understand, and I say this lovingly, to followers, other followers and people that claim to be Christians, how they would try to impede, infringe, if that's the word, on other Christians and really try to push off the position that we are not to carry guns at carte blanche, just broad brush.
I think in many areas, if you had the opportunity to stop bad things from happening, and if you didn't do it, they would call you irresponsible. You could have done something.
Sure. Irresponsible. Yeah, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
If you had the ability to be a defender of somebody, of the weak, because that's what we're called to do. Be
like the guy in Florida, the guard that didn't go in. Remember that shit?
Oh, the cop, yeah.
Well, isn't that ironic? But this is my point. I mean, thank you for bringing that up. That's exactly right. So in Florida, at what, Parkland? At Parkland, I mean, that officer, rightfully so, by the way, was just attacked and constructively and overtly criticized and fired or whatever it was. I mean, you signed up for that job. Yeah. Number one, but what was he going to do? They're saying, why didn't you use your weapon appropriately and combine that with courage and knowing that you were there to serve and protect and that you could pay with your life and go in there and save those innocent lives? How is that any different?
I don't know how those parents do it. I mean, the idea that my kids could still be alive if somebody would have done something.
Yeah. Somebody made another comment. This is horrible, but the same people who are against us keeping guns are for abortion, aka murder by forceps.
By what?
The same people that are against us having guns are for murder of the innocent with forceps.
Well,
that's another 2 hours.
That's another. Who's made that comment?
Weston Martinez.
Okay, well, he's making a logical argument. He's saying, okay, your position, your logic has to be consistent. So you're against guns because it's going to potentially take a life. No one even makes the analysis of whether it's justifiable, not justifiable. They never hold the evil person that's trying to take the innocent life accountable. But yet, it doesn't get any more innocent than a child in a mommy's womb. It doesn't get any more innocent than that.
Not.
But that discussion, that logical analysis is completely left on the sideline. And that's its own argument. This is its own argument. And to me, I call bullshit on that. They've got to be logically consistent. Whatever your position is has to be logically consistent. And the biblical position is to protect, here's the key word, innocent life. That is a biblical position. We are to appropriately protect innocent life. That applies to abortion. That applies to self-defense. That applies to defense of third person. And that is consistent.
Very.
Bill says, some people feel they are called to protect the defenseless. Wow, Tyler's falling down. Right. Some people feel they are called to protect the defenseless, whether it's with a gun or not. It's a calling.
Yeah. Well, look, in law enforcement, there's the sheep, there's the wolves, and there's the sheepdogs. Look, in my humble opinion, there's the sheep and there's wolves. A sheepdog is just a wolf that has submitted themselves to something righteous, which is, to me, it's Christ.
We got a caller.
You got to go call in.
Okay, hello. Who's this? Hello. Hey, bro.
Hello.
Hey, what's
Hi,
your...
This is Quinn.
Hey, Quinn.
From Texas. Hi. I just wanted... I'm sorry?
Yeah, your comment?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Quinn.
Yeah, I just maybe want some clarification. Maybe I'm just trying to wrestle through something as myself. Just with the whole issue, like when you're talking about Jesus and the whole thing with taking up or selling your cloak and buying a sword. I just didn't I'm trying to figure out because in none of the other gospels do you hear mention of Jesus ever mentioning buying a sword, and in the verses before or chapters before, Jesus is saying sell all your possessions and give to the poor. So maybe can you clarify as far
Great
as
question.
what's going on or what that means? I mean, I myself, I have my concealed carry license, and I am an advocate for gun rights. Maybe can you help clarify and maybe shed light into
I'll do a quick parallel, and you've brought up I think your question is very insightful. There are recurring themes in Luke 22, and those themes find parallels in Matthew and Mark. And so, for instance, I mentioned on the issue of selling your purse and your knapsack, and in the other versions it happens to be sandals. You can find that, for instance, I believe it's in Luke chapter 9, and it's also in Luke chapter 10. Oh, sorry. They're telling me I should be looking over here. So there are also other themes that you'll find in Matthew 26. You're going to find them in Matthew 20. This is all in Luke 22, and you can find all of these in the other Gospels. In Matthew 26, in Matthew 20, for instance, Mark chapter 14. So this is a repetition of several themes. In Luke 22, Jesus talks about his betrayal. He talks about Peter's betrayal. He talks about what it really means to be great in the kingdom of God. This is an ongoing theme about the misuse of power. He uses an analogy earlier. Start at verse 21, and you'll see that he uses an analogy of people in the world tend to lord their power over others and misuse it. And he contrasts that with what he expects us to do. He expects the disciple leader to be a servant. We've talked about many times in here that our job is to persuade others to drop differences against one another and to bring relief to our families, to our friends, to our community. We're supposed to be pursuers of peace. So all of these themes are repeated inside Luke, and they find parallels in the other places. The one thing that's unique to this passage is the reference to swords. That is a Lucan sort of addition. And so scholars have talked about this, and this is probably an argument for Luke either using an additional source or Luke simply having included this in his discourse. But everything else is included in other Gospels.
But George, we've talked about this. Quinn, great question, by the way.
Doesn't mean it's not legitimate. It's just, it's Luke's.
But the Gospels have different meanings. Matthew has a different audience.
Yes.
Right? Mark has a different audience.
Yep.
Luke has a different. Luke is given an orderly account, not necessarily in Matthew and Mark. They're not orderly. I'm not saying they're not accurate. They're just not orderly.
He's very precise.
Luke is writing for someone, for some leader. He is doing an orderly account. And so he's looking at the universality of Jesus.
For everyone, including the downtrodden. To your point, Luke is a doctor.
That's
we
right.
find this in Colossians chapter 4. He's a doctor, and so he cares deeply about those who are marginalized. He cares very deeply. I'm very hesitant to use a slogan today called social justice, which I just abhor and detest. There's no such thing as social justice in the Bible. There's just justice.
That's right.
Okay? Social justice is justice that's metered out based on what society sees as justice. And that's not acceptable. Justice is justice, right? It's God's justice, not what society happens to believe is just.
Society will change, God doesn't.
Of course it will.
Go back, sorry.
But Luke is very concerned about these things. And so you're going to see a recurring theme in Luke about this. So you're very insightful to bring that up.
But Matthew's audience was who?
Well, that was targeted largely for a Jewish culture because he's trying to establish the Jewishness of Jesus.
That's right.
And that makes sense. Jesus starts at home, right? These are his people. He's come through a Jewish lineage. And so Matthew establishes him as the ideal Jew, and that's why he takes all that time in his genealogy in Matthew chapter 3 to go through it.
And then Mark's audience is something very different as well.
Yeah.
And then so Luke's is that. So great question, Quinn, but there's no question that
Matthew 1 and in Luke chapter 3. I was going to say Luke also has a genealogy, but it's interesting how Luke goes all the way back to Adam, but Matthew starts at Abraham, because Abraham is the beginning of the Jewish lineage.
Right.
But Luke wants to establish Jesus as the Savior of all mankind, as coming from. So he goes back all the way to Adam. So, but very insightful question. Yep.
So
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
it does.
Lucy says, I'm for having a way to defend myself. If it's owning a gun, so be it. Julie says, something that really resonated with me was in training. It applies for an individual, a Christian protector, or organizational workplace. Safety decisions about whether or not to carry a sidearm was, you have to decide what level of threat you want to be able to defend against.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I always tell people, and I think that this needs to be asked to anybody, is what are you prepared to do?
Yeah.
That's it. What are you prepared to do to defend your children, to defend your most precious loved ones, which is your spouse, your children, things of this nature? And most people say anything.
Yeah.
Most people do.
Yeah.
And I'm just, it's interesting to me, people that do not support responsible gun ownership. I like to have discussions with them because I really want to understand their logic and where they're coming from, at what place, and what is their remedy to defend against evil, and they usually doesn't have one.
Somebody, Vidal is saying that he thinks that the razor was still on Christmas vacation.
The what?
The razor, because they're asking what happened to the beard and where are the intentions.
Okay.
Christine says, what is happening with the beard and what are its intentions for 2020?
I'm trying to be like Jesus. I'm trying to be like
What would
Jesus.
Jesus
What's
do?
wrong with you, huh? He just had a sword and he has a beard. I have a gun and a beard. What the hell's wrong with you? No, my daughter asked me to grow the beard out for No Shave November. I started November 10th.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, why didn't you ask me before? If it was bothering you so much.
And
then December came in, and then someone said, don't shave December. And Maya liked it. I got past the itchy stage. I was cussing up a storm because I was itching like crazy. I got past the itching stage, and then I said, and she goes, Papi, please don't shave it. I said, well, I'm going to give it till January, and it's already January, so I'm giving it to Monday. I'm taking a poll. I'm taking a poll, man, because I'm past the itching stage. Some people want it off, other people like it. I don't know. Give me your thoughts. I'll figure it out.
Anyway, that's it.
That was what we were saying.
Sylvia says, I have a gun, but I'm not taking it to church.
Okay.
I would ask her, what would it take for you to take it to church?
Well,
Because times are changing.
But my question is this:
Sure,
why?
Yeah, why exactly?
I mean, why? I mean, that's fine if you don't want to, but why? Especially in light of today. I mean, I mean, how many times have I said, oh, that's never happened before?
Yeah.
Do you know how many that's never happened before? I mean, I was in Florida where someone went into a yoga studio and started shooting. That's insane. I'm going to say something bold, but I've said it openly before, even when I was DA. I advocate, and I wish state reps and state senators would really sit down and contemplate a way for someone, and I'm okay with an extra class because I love to train, for people to carry guns in schools.
Yeah.
I really do. Why do we want to tell someone with evil intentions that will never follow the law, hey, there's no guns here? I don't understand that. Now that I'm not a prosecutor anymore, I can't carry my gun anywhere anymore. I follow the laws based off 30-06 and 30-7. But I won't go to a place that won't allow me to take my gun. I just won't. Yeah. It's that important. I've seen too much. I've seen parking lots at HEBs or wherever else, and movie theaters and this. I mean, just everyday things. People taking their trash out, and they got the wrong house, and somebody thought it was somebody else's house, and somebody was shot. I mean, any situation. We live in a very different world, and I think being a good steward, my humble opinion, I've been entrusted with 4 of God's precious children, and a wife that's way too good for me. And as a good steward, it's my job. I believe it's my duty as the husband and as the man in the house to protect my family. Yeah. Reasonably, responsibly. I make sure they wear their seatbelts. I make sure they eat healthy. I make sure the doors are locked. I make sure that I provide financially for them, and then spiritually and emotionally, and affirmation, discipline, and also I'm prepared to defend their lives with my life. And so if somebody's going to come for my family, they better be ready to pay with theirs.
Like when you teach proper gun education, for example, when you teach your kid to drive, you teach them of the power of going fast, the power of the weight of the car and what it can do. So once you teach them the power of that, they respect that power. Same thing with guns.
Have you noticed, I mean, if you did the study, if someone did a responsible handling of the statistics and the data, the gun ownership in these states, Texas being one of them, where there's a high number of people that hunt. At a very young age, young kids are taught how to handle a weapon. I've been around guns since I was a kid. Yeah. My kids are around guns. I mean, they know, Papi, they go to the range with me, they go shooting. I promised Maya, I'm supposed to take Maya hunting for the first time this year, and it hadn't happened. My brother is gonna take his daughter, and I'm gonna take Maya. She's shot weapons before. They understand it's not a toy. This is not a game. They understand gun safety, and they understand just don't touch it. First of all, there's never guns left out where they can attain them. So there's proper safety. There needs to be proper training. Again, I wanna go back to my first point. I wish, and I hope our state legislators would create some venue or avenue where people can have guns in schools, whether that's a school marshal, if you can't do law enforcement and you can't have 4 or 5 law enforcement officers there in every school, every single school, then somebody has a weapon.
What about church?
Huh?
Would you do the same thing with the church?
The law has changed, by the way. The new law, and our Attorney General and our Lieutenant Governor was on some different media outlets saying that the new law is what saved a lot of the people there. Look at Sutherland, and I'm not being critical because I've met Steve. I've met the hero of Sutherland Springs. He's a good man. He loves the Lord. He risked his life. And because he had a high-capacity long rifle, I will not say assault rifle. That is a misuse of terms. This is assault fist, assault elbow, assault boot, assault anything. Everything can be used for an assaultive purpose. So, but a high-capacity long rifle, if he didn't have that, then more lives would have been lost, and he wouldn't have been able to gauge that evil person at that distance because he wouldn't have had the proper weapon. But aside from that, George, nobody at Sutherland Springs, and I say this lovingly, I have a friend of mine who was the DPS in charge of the investigation. He's a regional leader, and he said, Nico, I've investigated a lot of scenes, a lot of murder scenes, and this was the most horrifying and horrific.
Nobody had a gun.
Nobody. 18-month-old child shot. 5-year-old shot after their sister or sibling was shot. People sat there and they waited their turn. And so I think if we continually push this message, not everybody does this, of pacifism in the church, I think it's wrong. 2 Timothy 1:7, we're not given a spirit of timidity. We're given a strength, sound mind, courage, and love to submit ourselves. Meekness in Matthew 5, the meek will inherit, not the weak. Meek just means humble and gentle. Joshua is not a pacifist. David was not a pacifist. Jesus at times kicked some ass, man. In the temple at different times, he lost his cool. It was righteous anger with the Pharisees in Matthew 23. He was bold, man. He was not a wussy, and he definitely wasn't a doormat. We're not called to be doormats as Christians. We're called to temper ourselves. We're called not to misuse our sword, and that's what Jesus was correcting on Peter. And we're called to be good stewards, and that means protect loved ones and innocent life.
Bill says evil will target the easiest path. Lucas says possible lack of spiritual belief that life is sacred.
Well, the Imago Dei that George and I
Yeah.
talk about. Did I cut you off earlier, George?
No, I mean, make me think in terms of the stats that I don't know how many people are aware that we actually had a federal assault weapons ban that's been enacted in the United States, and it expired in September of 2004. And when it expired, the number of deaths were around 5.7 per 100,000 in terms of the number of murders in September of 2004. The number of murders and violent crimes came out to about 5.7 per 100,000. When you fast forward to 2011, 7 years after the ban had been gone, the number of murders and violent crime came down to 4.7 per 100,000. So much for the damn ban. So, I mean, we actually have some data that shows relatively conclusively that bans don't freaking work, man.
And gun ownership versus misuse. We're not talking about...
The issue's not about
it
the
makes
gun,
no
man.
logical sense to me, and the Christians should be defending this position. The Christians, why would I punish you? You're a law-abiding citizen. There's not a mental health issue. That is something that needs to be addressed. We need proper training. Every Christian should be for proper background checks. Every Christian should be supporting our laws, meaning that if someone has some behavioral disorder, somebody has bad behavior and there's some legal reason, they've been incarcerated in the past, they shouldn't have a gun, there's a mental health issue, there's some reason why they shouldn't have a weapon. I'm cool with that. Look, I'm even of the belief that if you want a high capacity long rifle, I know it pisses off some of my brothers and sisters that love guns, that there should be an extra safety course, a long rifle high capacity, if not, people can hurt themselves. It's not that you don't have a right to it. You don't need your high capacity long rifle today, but you should be able to buy a handgun or a rifle, a shotgun, if there's no legal reason why you shouldn't. But I'm just a huge advocate, Saulo and George, for training. Train.
Sure.
You have to train. You will fight like you train. And if we do not train properly...
Nico, would you say you're in the middle? For example, a lot of people we all tend to go to extremes sometimes, right? So some people say, well, guns for everybody. Some people don't want any guns. Some people say, okay, want guns for everybody. Are you saying you're in the middle of saying, you know what, some guns, okay.
No.
But are you saying some particular guns need extra steps to get them?
Yeah,
That's what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I'm not in the middle. Because there was a judge one time when I first started practicing law, sweetest guy you'll ever meet. I won't say his name. But he said, that was a great objection, but I think I gave you the last one, so overruled. I mean, it was like one of those deals, like tit for tat. I'm not that guy. If the truth is 100% against me, then it's 100% against me. If the truth is 100% for me, then it's 100. Truth has got to prevail. So I am reasonable. I'm just saying a high capacity long rifle, people buy a bunch of AR-15s or high capacity long rifles without the proper training can hurt themselves. If someone doesn't want to commit to training, I don't even advocate them buying a semi-automatic handgun. I say buy a revolver. Shit, what the hell are you going to do? You're not going to change your magazine, tap and rack, and clear a misfeed anyway. So just pull the trigger 5-6 times, and if you need more than 5 or 6 rounds, you're screwed anyway for that person. But so I'm a huge advocate of training. So I'm not in the middle in the sense that I am for truth, and I believe that a high-capacity long rifle, if not trained with properly and don't know how to handle it, can be very dangerous, just like a high-capacity car, by the way.
That's right.
Think about this.
Yeah.
There's not a speed limit in this country that goes over 85 or 90. And correct me if I'm wrong, is there? Is there a speed limit? But every car goes 120 if not faster. Every damn car goes 120 and faster. Even the beaters go 120 or faster. And then forget about the motorcycles that they're just built for speed.
They are, man.
So when people say, why do you need a high capacity weapon? Why do you need a car that goes past the speed limit, that there's no speed limit? I mean, so again, the logic has to be consistent, and I see nobody advocating against fast cars or speed limits or anything like that. So I hope we've addressed this properly and thoroughly and biblically, more important. It's got to be a biblical analysis because we're Christians, and like we always say that we're having a family discussion. We're talking to other believers in Jesus Christ, and we hope that non-believers listen in and eavesdrop on us, because we want these discussions to be for everybody, and we want to engage people, and we want to ultimately model for people how to have discussions.
We try to keep it out of American partisan politics in this conversation.
It's about principle.
Yeah, it is.
It's about ideology, and it's about a biblical worldview.
But at some point, I'm sure people will want to know.
Oh, see that? He's red meat over here to this guy.
Where we come down.
Don't get this guy started.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
What do you know? Saulo, what do you know?
Let me ask you a question, a legal question.
Uh-oh.
Is there a particular law of not being able to show your gun?
Well, sure, it could be aggravated assault if it's not shown properly. Look,
No, not like just showing it. Like, I see you carried it all the time.
Oh, it's open carry now. So it moved, the law changed from
No,
concealed
here, I'm
license.
talking about here. For example, you have a gun. You carry a gun, right?
I have a gun, yes.
You carry a gun. You wouldn't show it anywhere. Like, right?
I'm not going to show it to
Is there
them.
a particular reason? Is that a
No,
personal
just
thing?
because what for? I have a gun. I carried a gun in here. I carry a gun everywhere I
I'm not
go.
a big fan of open carry, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
You're not a fan of open carry?
open carry, no. I'm not a fan of open
I mean,
carry.
nothing against people who do it. I just
Think about what. So think about this. So let's say go back to the church. Here's the guy. He's the whole time he's planning on murdering people. He's looking around. He's like, oh look, that guy's got a gun. He's the first one I'm shooting. I don't want anybody shooting me knowing I have a gun. Right. Well, now people know I carry a gun, but you don't know when or how many guns I have. So I mean, but look, everybody should.
That's right.
Huh? I mean, look. I mean, why do you open carry? I don't want anyone to know where it's at. Because if you open carry, and this is why I advocated against it. Just because it's permissible doesn't mean it's beneficial. That's biblical, by the way. I mean, so if you have open carry, now what level of holster do you have? Is it level 1, level 2, level 3? And the levels mean like how many positions do you have to manipulate before you take the weapon out? Law enforcement usually have level 4s, meaning they have to do a number of things before their weapon can be taken out. If they're in a fight, you don't want someone pulling their gun out like in the old days, which is the holster, a level 1 holster cops used to carry. And so then retention. So if someone's trying to grab your gun, do you have retention techniques? Can you fight with your hands, hand to hand, elbows, eye gouging things, but also protect your gun? Because if that gun gets out, and that's what people don't understand. If somebody attacks an officer, uniformed officer with a weapon, if that officer gets knocked out, they take that gun, now everybody's in danger. If you're attacking an officer with a weapon, I mean, that's deadly force in and of itself. So when people say, oh my God, I can't believe someone was shot without a weapon, I mean, you have to understand the context of the engagement, and that's why video, and that's another discussion itself.
Jason asked, did the law change from concealed to open carry in Texas?
Yes, it's open carry now. So your license is not a concealed license. Everybody says CHL, concealed handgun license. It's an LTC, a license to carry now. So your license to carry means open or closed. There's a lot of places that say 30-06, 30-7, 30-7 meaning don't open carry. If they don't have 30-6, that means they're essentially telling you you can conceal carry because you've probably been doing it all this time, but don't open carry. And I don't advocate open carry. Yeah. So if you have a weapon and you carry it, just conceal it. I think that's wise.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
I would advise that you tell everybody to stay vigilant because there's some nutbag or two out there who's going to put vengeance on that or that killed evil. Because that's just the way this world works, right? Somebody out there is already
always stay vigilant. Yeah, stay vigilant. Take care of each other. Train. Educate yourself. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people perish for what? Lack of knowledge." So educate yourself on every aspect of your life: marital, financial, health-wise, nutritional, everything.
Well, that's what
spiritual
Jesus
too.
was teaching there at the end of Luke. Be vigilant.
Be vigilant.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Be watchful. Right?
Always be prepared. Thank you guys. God bless you. If you have any other questions, you have any ideas about topics, please share this with other people. If you think they'll be benefit from these type of discussions, you can always go back. We're trying our best to get all of our shows, episodes, whatever they're called, segments, not only on what is it, on iTunes. We're working on that, right?
Maybe Instagram.
YouTube, what? Spotify, I don't know. That's Saulo's deal. Instagram, maybe. Okay, we're working on that. We've had some requests. So we're doing our best, guys. We're trying our best. But this is about you. So if there's a topic you want to see handled and discussed through a biblical lens, let us know. Have a kick-ass week. The Lord loves you. What do you want to say?
I want to thank Lucy Sheffer for checking in. She's an old friend.
She's not old. She's a friend that you've known for a long time.
I didn't say she was old. She was Thank you for that.
Lucy, I'm just
Thanks for watching, Lucy. It's been a long time.
God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week. Happy New Year.